I'm going to have a drink before we start. What episode is it?
It's episode 36 of season 2, Pete.
Oh, excellent. What year is it?
2021.
So I have a joke for you.
Do you? I'm thrilled.
Yeah, I thought you would be. So a bear walks into a bar. He goes up to the bartender and he says to the bartender, "I'd like to have a beer."
Why the big pause? Pete, honestly, I can't believe you roped me into one of your awful jokes. And like all great jokes, I feel that some people may have missed the punchline and it may need some explanation.
Well, you loved it. You loved it, really. You now see why dad jokes are so good. But the punchline is, of course, that bears have big paws.
Okay, thanks for that. So if you didn't get it, now you did, and it still wasn't funny. So, Pete, have you got anything else to offer that is actually funny?
No, I have no more jokes for you this week. But I have got some sad news. I had to go to a funeral the other day.
Try not to laugh as you say.
And
that's what you're going to be like when you go to my funeral.
Yeah.
Go on. Let's pretend that this isn't another joke rumbling on.
And the wife of the deceased asked me to say a few words during the service. So I stood up and I said plethora, and I sat down. And she said to me afterwards, "Thanks. That means a lot."
Oh, goodness. Well,
I've got a joke about a penguin as well, but it's not appropriate.
No, let's not do that one. I've heard that one. And the one about the rabbits. We're not doing that one either. So if you've just tuned in on the basis of the thumbnail and you've never tuned into the Constant Geekery podcast before, and if so, shame on you. Really, come on. Everybody should be tuned in to the Constant Geekery podcast.
I know it's an anachronism, but who tunes in anymore? You don't lay out with a little dog going, and then you're into the Constant Geekery podcast halfway through. You don't tune into things. The algorithm suggests it, or a friend shares it, or something like that. I know it's not quite as catchy as tuned in.
Do you know what? I responded to a comment this morning from someone else who got really upset over a standard word choice that just means something else these days. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
was it me?
No.
It's like when people say I'm going to tape something. Who tapes something these days?
No, but everybody knew what I meant. And now I've completely lost my train of thought. I was welcoming new viewers who are probably tuning in because we're talking about Apple Silicon. How much RAM do you need to buy with your new Apple Silicon machine? And I think that's a question I get asked a lot.
And it's a good question.
It's a good question. And we are going to answer that today and maybe do a bit of an Apple Silicon buying guide. So that is coming. But our usual form is to cover off a few news stories first, and then we're going to get straight into that main topic. So,
do we want a little teaser for the end as well, the little reveal we're going to do at the end?
No, I don't think so. I think people need to just wait for that.
Oh.
So, first in the news, Steam Deck, Pete, it's been delayed.
Oh, again?
No, not again, just delayed.
Well,
it was supposed to start shipping in December for the early people, who, and which I was one of.
The early people.
I was one of them.
Maybe I'm saying it's delayed again because I was always expecting it to be delayed.
Yeah, it's just a component shortage issue, just like everyone else is facing. So they're expecting now first shipments in February 2022, and I'm actually quite pleased about that because I have got no energy whatsoever for making videos about new tech in December.
Or any time for doing it.
Yeah, so that's fine. That'll come in February, and provided that the wallet has sufficiently recovered from the Apple Silicon adventures, then I will indeed follow through on that pre-order.
Excellent.
Something else that you'll see all around the place at the moment is the Black Friday deals that are surfacing.
Yeah, I'm fed up of it already, and it's not even started yet.
Yeah, this was a very American thing that seems to have crossed the pond in the past few years, and it's becoming quite big over here as well now. And it seems to, just like everything else, start earlier each year.
Yeah.
And I just think it's always worth bearing in mind that a lot of these Black Friday deals, they work on this kind of basis of fear of missing out. So you've got to rush your purchasing decision because it seems like a great deal is on offer, and quite often the deal is not as good as it appears.
No.
Particularly in tech. So I just think it's good just to say be cautious about that.
Yeah,
prices
shop around.
Prices do indeed get adjusted before Black Friday in order for them to be adjusted again at Black Friday.
Yeah, because legally, certainly in the UK, I don't know, I can't comment for other countries, but they can't say it was at this price if they didn't actually have it up for a couple of days beforehand. But it's still quite misleading because you could have it up for like 2 days in your slowest trading period at a ridiculous price, and then you could say, we've slashed 60% off this, but of course no one would have bought it at that.
Allegedly. Price. People might do that, of course. We're not saying that anybody necessarily definitely has.
I've not singled anyone out, so yeah. But interestingly, just on that topic, I did notice that some retailers aren't going to be going so mad for Black Friday this year because of the impact of coronavirus, and that they're gonna ease off on it a bit. But we'll wait to see.
Interesting. A little bit of news for Prime Video watchers. There's now a native macOS app so that you can watch your Primes natively on your Mac.
Ooh, and that's a bit of native action.
Yeah, so that's good news. Thank you, Amazon, for doing that. If indeed they've sorted out their search, that would be good. I find it very difficult to surface content in Amazon on the TV app.
Really?
It just shows you the same stuff all the time.
Yeah. And it's not so good at showing you, if you've been watching a series, the pick up where you left off, continue watching often is buried. Although I've noticed that started happening with other channels as well, so I wonder if it's a deliberate attempt to expose more content to you that you can then bookmark for later.
Yeah, and also Amazon are now showing lots of content that's not actually included in Prime that you've got to pay for, and shame on you, Amazon, for doing that. Not happy about that.
Apple TV do that as well.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, annoying.
Yeah.
Anyway, you've got some news.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Selective security updates from Apple. So Forbes reported, or were reporting on a privilege escalation bug that surfaced probably back end of last year, beginning of this year, that has been utilised by some well-resourced malicious actors to access MacBooks. Or Macs, actually. Apple patched it on the 1st of February 2021, but for Big Sur only. They didn't patch it on Catalina until the 23rd of September, despite Catalina still being eligible for updates and security patches.
That's quite a delay, isn't it? I mean, it's not like there's not a lot of people still running Catalina.
And a lot of people doing that through no choice, because it may be that either the software or more particularly the hardware they're using can't go beyond that. Or they're just waiting for whatever reason. So quite a hole there. Why Apple waited that long to patch something rather than doing it at the same time? I mean, Apple have never really had to worry as much about security vulnerabilities as, say, Windows historically, but that's shifting, I think. And they're not very good at feeding back to, security experts report to them vulnerabilities, and Apple go, we fixed various vulnerabilities and bugs, but they don't go into any detail, and that doesn't help the security companies to do their job, which is, not unlike Apple, to be a little bit opaque about things.
It's just the way they do things, and it is very frustrating when you get a security notification or a new update to download, and you dig into it and you can't find any information about what it's actually going to change on your machine. Very frustrating. Anyway, without further delay, let's get into our main topic, Pete.
Yes. What is our main topic this week?
Our main topic is about is basically your buying guide for Apple Silicon, and specifically focusing in on how much RAM do you need to buy. So we had this question. We're going to cover the original M1. Do I get 8 gigs or 16? With the M1 Pro, do I get 16 or 32? With the M1 Max, do I get 32 or 64? And I think based on all of the testing that we've done, we can probably give some reasonable answers to that, with the usual caveats, of course.
I would say so, because we have done a lot of testing now.
We have done a lot of testing, and we actually have all of these machines as well. So let's start off with what I think we said something like normal people And what we mean by that
General computing.
is general computing. Yeah, goodness sake. Honestly, people get so tied up on the individual words that you say.
Semantics. Particularly when we're on the podcast, we do this. We've got some notes, but we literally do it unscripted.
Yeah.
So sometimes, particularly me, I will come up with the wrong word for things. I like to be Pacific, but sometimes I need more espresso in the morning.
Oh dear. And it's really hard to fill the blank space. It's not so bad on a YouTube video, but when obviously the podcast is also syndicated across to iTunes and Spotify, and some people listen to the audio only version, and you don't want to have loads of dead space unless it's for the punchline of a joke, of course.
Absolutely.
So filling all of that dead space, we just pick the words that come into our heads, and that doesn't mean that we always get it right. This isn't a carefully scripted, typed out kind of thought process.
Anyway, that being said, general computing for normal people. That was a joke. So what sort of things are we talking about for general computing?
Okay.
Things like web browsing,
Web browsing, yeah,
checking your email,
absolutely.
writing your email. In fact,
Right,
generally email.
Yeah,
Office tasks.
definitely.
So not hoovering or dusting, that kind of thing, but word processing, spreadsheets,
That kind of stuff.
maybe a bit of PowerPoint action,
Yeah,
or numbers, or Keynote, whatever floats your boat.
yeah. I think most people are using their machines for work and for personal use. So there's going to be some media consumption in there. So
Yeah.
YouTube, Prime Video, we just mentioned. You might be watching Netflix or downloading movies or whatever. So
And actually, even in the workspace, media consumption is becoming a bigger thing. So
well, a lot of our developers have their music on, don't they?
yeah,
So you might be listening to Spotify or Apple Music or something.
we're just about to start doing webinars and LinkedIn Live on our agency.
Yeah,
So that will be targeted at people working.
absolutely.
But, yeah, so media consumption covers that all. Of course, since the pandemic particularly, more and more people are into the old video conferencing, a bit of Zoom or Teams or
Yeah,
Blue Jeans, apparently.
Blue Jeans.
Yeah, it's another video conferencing platform.
Is it? Okay, I've not heard of that one. So all of those things come under to general computing, but Apple also focuses its devices at home users, families, and it provides free software. And I think it's one of the lovely things actually about macOS, because Windows has some good software, but it doesn't kind of compete with what Mac give you for free, essentially. So you've got things like your editing your family photos with Apple Photo, home movies with iMovie, making music in GarageBand. You might even be doing some casual gaming as well. And
Yes.
I would put all of that under general computing for the average person. That's your kind of foundation level of what we expect from a computer. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would. And anyone who's got a computer will be doing some or all of those things most of the time.
Right. So if that's you, if that's general purpose computing, and if that's all you do, and I don't mean that to be
Disparaging?
no, yeah, I mean that is how people use their computers. So if that's your use case, and we've described all of the things that you do on a computer, then any of the standard M1 machines will work for you. Even the entry-level MacBook Air or the iMac, which has one less graphics core and 8 gigabytes of RAM, that's going to be absolutely fine for all of those general computing tasks. And not just fine, it does it without breaking any kind of sweat. So you're also getting, particularly obviously if it's a notebook, long battery life.
No fans.
No fan noise on the
Silent.
MacBook Air. Yeah. So pretty amazing stuff, actually, what M1 has achieved. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're only doing general purpose computing that you shouldn't go for one of these new machines, for example.
No. But particularly if you want the new form factor,
Yeah.
which is starting to, proving to be a bit marmitey, but I love it. I think it's a gorgeous thing.
Most people who say they don't like it haven't actually seen it in real life. That's
Yeah.
what I'm noticing, because most people who see it in real life go, oh, that's better than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it, how video, you'd think video or photography doesn't lie, but it doesn't do it justice.
It doesn't. When you get these things out of the box, it's like, oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, that is quite nice, actually.
Interesting. So, yeah, if you like that form factor, you might decide to go for the M1 Pro.
Yeah, so specifically, you're getting extra ports, the ability to plug in more external displays. You've got this lovely mini LED display as well, complete with its notch, SD card reader, HDMI port, that kind of thing. So there is an argument for going for this form factor. If your priority, though, and you're only doing this general purpose computing, if your priority is battery life, you're better off with the original M1 MacBook Pro.
Yes, indeed.
So that's our kind of first little piece of buying advice. And of course, then the question that gets asked is, well, okay, you can get the M1 with 8 gigs of RAM. When do you need to go to 16 gigabytes? What additional tasks do we need to add to that pool of general computing that warrant a bit of extra RAM?
Okay, so we could start with photographers. Be you an amateur, but you take it seriously. I'd say that no disrespect, you don't get paid for your photography as a rule in terms of your skills.
Most people don't want to pay me for my photography.
So by that definition, you're an amateur, but you take it seriously. You know what you're doing.
I'd say I was an enthusiast.
All right. See, this is what I mean by choice of words. Okay, so photographers, be they amateurs or enthusiasts, who might be using things like maybe Lightroom to pull out a bit more detail. Perhaps they've got a camera that makes good use of that. Designers.
Yeah, definitely. Anybody who's doing creative work in Photoshop or Illustrator or similar apps to those, then yeah, I think you would benefit from additional RAM.
Yeah. Of course, one that is dear to our heart is coders. So web developers and coding tasks where...
What sort of development are we talking about, though? I mean, for us, we run a digital agency, so our developers are primarily doing web development tasks.
Yeah, so things where you're not compiling really complex projects.
Okay, so yeah, if you're doing Android or iOS development in Xcode and you've got massive projects to compile,
that is a very resource-intensive thing.
It is, and you might want to consider a faster CPU, which is available now, where it wasn't previously. So the M1 Pro comes into play. But so what we're talking about here is coders who don't have that need. They could stick with M1 with 16 gigs.
Yeah.
We showed that you can do basic video editing on the M1 with optimized codecs, especially.
Yeah, I would say even intermediate video editing with the right codecs. If
you get the 16 gig model, I think we showed the 8 gig model can do very basic stuff. I mean, which, as we mentioned, with our general computing, home movies with iMovie, no sweat whatsoever with 8 gigs. If you're starting to do, multiple streams of video on top of each other and titling and effects and those kind of things,
you can get to the point where you choke it, and it does just drop off a cliff when that happens. So I think we've got to be careful. There will be some people out there who will say, well, I've got an 8 gig M1 and it's perfectly adequate for all my editing, and there's lots of variations to that, but it's when you start getting more complex with your edits, that's where the 16 gig really helps.
Yeah, so a case in point there, our pal iCave Dave, I know he shoots his video on his iPhone and then edits it on his 8 gig Mac Mini, and it's that kind of workflow it's absolutely perfect for. What we're talking about is stepping it up, to a level where you're using pro codecs from cameras that need a bit of GPU horsepower, those kind of things, where you just need to have a little bit more RAM in your back pocket. So this is one of the things you've got to remember when you're looking at Apple Silicon, because we're so locked into the whole x86 paradigm when it comes to computing specs, and the unified memory really turns that on its head a little bit. You have to remember that the CPU and the GPU are accessing the same memory. So if you've only got 8 gigs, suddenly you can see that the GPU and CPU are going to be competing with each other if you're doing anything beyond basic stuff with it.
Yeah.
So it's important just to understand those differences. I think music pros as well would probably go for a 16 gigabyte M1.
What, using Logic or something like that?
I mean, I benchmarked it and it wasn't far off the trash can Mac Pro that I had at the time, which had a 12-core Xeon in it and 64 gigs of RAM. The 16 gig M1, it was behind, but it wasn't a long way behind. Obviously, there are other things to consider as well. If you're a music pro, you need to check that your peripherals are going to work properly. Not all of them do yet. Likewise, plugins and things like that. But certainly a 16 gigabyte M1 can do an awful lot. I mean, short of like massive orchestral scores, the M1 is going to suit anybody, and especially home recording artists.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
There is one other reason to go for 16 gigs, though.
What is that?
Future-proofing.
Ah, yes.
Yeah. If you can afford it, get the 16 gig model with the M1 because...
it's soldered on. You
Yeah.
can't upgrade it.
Yeah.
So if you're planning to keep your Mac for any period of time, get the most that you can afford on the M1.
So that's standard M1, and let's just put the standard M1 in context. It's got more CPU performance in the real world than the i9 8-core that was in the top Intel MacBook Pros.
And that's a good reminder because I think it's very easy. I know it's happening in my head, but it doesn't stop me feeling that way. We tend to look at the M1 as this kind of like inferior thing now because we've got M1 Pro and M1 Max. But it is still an amazing device. It's just because there's something newer and more powerful doesn't make the M1 irrelevant anymore. It is amazing. Do not feel shortchanged.
No, because there's a lot more going on in there than just a CPU. You know, you've got all the other the optimizations that Apple has made, which is what makes the thing so good at all of these general purpose computing tasks. And the GPU, I mean, for me, I've been saying that is the weak point in the new M1 lineup. When it came out last year, I wanted to see better GPU performance, which we've now got. But that said, compared to, say, for instance, those entry-level MacBook Pros, the 15-inch and the 16-inch, the M1 GPU actually compares very favorably with those.
Yes, it does.
And you know, if you watch the main channel on YouTube, that's youtube.com/constantgeekery, later this week, hopefully, if I can get it all edited, then we've got the big video showdown coming. So you'll be able to see...
At least part one.
Part one, please. Don't do part one on me. So let's move on then to the M1 Pro.
Okay. So that comes as standard with 16 gigabytes anyway.
Yeah.
But you can spec it up to 32.
Yeah, so those are your two choices, 16 or 32. So before we answer that question, who is going to buy M1 Pro?
Well, you've got to compare it, haven't you, to a standard M1. So what's different? Well, single core performance, nothing.
Yeah, so this is, if you're new to M1, the new M1 chips are still M1. It's the same core designs. So the single core performance hasn't changed, with the slight exception that the Max is ever so slightly faster. But we're talking minuscule differences. You'll never notice it in the real world.
Yeah. So you're not going to see any massive performance increase there. But if you go for the entry-level 8-core 14-inch, that offers around 25% improvement on multi-threaded tasks over the M1.
Yeah, we've seen that. I think that's a bit of an average. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. But yeah, I'd say that's probably a fair flag in the ground point. 25% more performance, which is not to be sniffed at.
No.
The 10-core model, though.
Well, that takes it on a bit further, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably another 30% performance over the 8-core model.
Yeah.
So it's 2/3 at least, getting on for 3/4 better than the standard M1. So the M1 Pro chips are pretty incredible.
Yeah, they are. So who might get one of those?
Well, anybody who needs more CPU performance. But don't forget, it's not just CPU performance that's been added. You've got the GPU cores as well.
Yes.
So anybody that needs more GPU power than M1 can provide would definitely want to consider M1 Pro. So that, going back to the things we're talking about, is creative tasks, video editing. I know there are some people out there who get really tired of hearing about video editing, but that is one of the most intensive tasks that you can throw at a computer. It tests the CPU, the memory, the GPU, everything.
Yeah. Other than sort of weather modelling, planetary body plotting and running Google Chrome, it's right up there with one of the strongest things you can do.
It is. So You can do some more advanced video editing with M1. Again, plug for our video that's coming.
Yeah.
But not just video editing though.
Well, again, it's creators with workloads that have very large assets. So take a photographer who's working with RAW files.
So specifically, the big ones that are coming off these latest cameras, 50 megapixel plus RAW files.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you will notice the difference.
Yeah, if you've got lots of them open, definitely. And also when you're exporting them, you will see a difference. So if you're a professional photographer and you have a workflow where you're going to a shoot and then you've got to export a whole bunch of photos and stuff, then yeah, you will see a big difference, I would have thought, with M1 Pro.
And if you're doing that sort of thing, time is money, so it's gonna be worthwhile you getting that extra meat.
And I think the price step up from an M1 MacBook Pro with 16 gigs of RAM, the price step up to a standard M1 MacBook Pro, did I say that? With 16 gigs of RAM up to the M1 Pro, it is a lot of money, but in a business context for a professional who's getting all of the tax rebates and everything else, it's almost a no-brainer because it will pay for itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, also, of course, it's people will go for M1 Pro if they need more multi-threaded performance.
Yeah, so we talked about coders before, but coders that need more performance for compiling. So things like Android apps, iOS apps using Xcode. Some of those storyboards in Xcode are massive memory hogs. So memory and CPU are all involved there, and it would make sense. You will be much more productive.
For sure. 3D artists who use CPU rendering engines. I will say the M1, that is an area of weakness for it.
Is it?
Yeah. And if you look at Cinebench benchmarks compared to Geekbench, for example, you'll see that the gap between M1 and x86 narrows greatly when you're doing Cinebench work. That said, there's still the 10-core M1 Pro is ahead of pretty much anything else out there at the price point. So
it'd be very interesting to see a Cinebench chart, wouldn't it, with the comparisons between different
I might pop one of those in our video.
If only there was one of those coming.
That's going to be coming this
like
week.
That was a little plug there.
Thanks.
That's
Well
right.
Very nice.
Yeah.
I think you all probably know if you need that additional multi-threaded performance. And if you're asking whether you need that, then you probably don't. And I think that is a fairly key point here. If you're making those kind of questions, do I need that additional performance? Well, if you don't know, then you probably don't.
With one exception.
Go on.
Which is if you're new to these disciplines, but it's a field you're looking to actively move into, either as an enthusiast or as a professional, you might find that if you are asking those questions and you don't have the answers, you might outgrow a less performant machine.
Yeah, in which case speak to others who are working in your industry to see what their recommendations would be as well. I mean, you shouldn't just take one source anyway. You need to...
Yeah. We're not experts on every workflow or software out there, far from it. In fact, we're probably not experts on anything. We're just... Well, sorry.
Thanks for that. No,
I'm just trying to be modest. I'm
probably
just trying to
agree
be
with you.
modest.
So back to the question then. You buy an M1 Pro, you got that choice, 16 or 32 gigs. What do you do?
Well, if there was some real-world testing we could refer to, we'd find that it makes almost no difference.
Indeed, there is some real-world testing we can refer to.
Is there? Yeah. Is there?
If you want to see that, have a look at Max Tech, which is a decent channel. Nice guys, and they've been working really hard on the M1 stuff. I don't agree with absolutely every one of their conclusions, but I have to say, when they tested the 16 versus the 32 gigs of memory, they really tortured those machines, and there wasn't a lot of difference at all. I mean, we're talking minuscule differences.
I actually feel bad about suggesting you're not an expert in certain things now.
No, it's okay, I'm not. How is this being achieved? Again, we've got to get ourselves out of this whole traditional x86 mindset. How's it being achieved? Well, memory compression, memory swapping. These SSDs are blindingly fast.
Yeah, probably most people won't even notice when the SSD is using the swap file, unlike the good old days of Windows where you really did know if you were using the swap file because you could physically hear the platter on the hard drive going.
Yeah. I got a lot of experience, although I'm no expert, you must understand, in setting up Linux servers for the web.
I've done you a disservice. I'm so sorry.
And back in the old days, when you used to have servers with spinning hard disks, and we're setting up Apache, which is the web server program. So you got to set up the server, you got to look at the available RAM, and you've got to perform various calculations based on the average memory use of each visitor to a website, how many visits you're getting, and everything else to optimize the system so that it didn't run out of memory. Because if it ran out of memory and hit the swap file on those spinning hard disks, the whole server went down and nobody was getting their websites.
No.
And that was a real thing. SSDs came along and kind of changed that a bit because the server would live through such an event. But it is that was the way of things. When you ran out of memory, everything stopped.
Absolutely.
But now it's not.
No.
In fact, I've had this a couple of times now on two different versions of these new Macs, and we saw it yesterday whilst doing a video render. The machine ran out of memory. Oh, yeah. Actually put an error message up on the screen. I've run out of memory. And then just carried on rendering regardless in the background.
It's almost like it just wanted to let you know, I've got a problem, but I'm dealing with it anyway.
And there'll be no difference in the performance, so don't worry about that either. Thanks very much.
Exactly. Yeah, so
do we worry?
I was going to ask you that. It's almost like we've got some notes here that we're working to.
It's almost like that.
No, we don't worry. As we've said, these SSDs have shown themselves to be A, blindingly fast, and B, well engineered. Apple know what they're doing with SSDs. We've had very few reports of failures. There's loads of videos that you've done on the channel on this. We've done some investigations. It's probably not something to worry about. Apple will have considered that in their engineering design of this system, which deliberately relies on swap.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody did comment on the main channel the other day on one of my older SSD videos that their SSD had just died and was off to Apple for repair. So
Sorry to hear that.
I did respond and ask whether that was a sudden failure or whether they got any kind of warnings or anything, but I didn't get any response. So perhaps it failed, perhaps it's
Maybe they can't respond because they've not got a device to do it on.
That's entirely possible. But it is also possible, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but it is also possible that people do type comments that are not necessarily accurate,
Yeah,
or in line with what's the actual reality. We do get some fanboy type comments occasionally. I think if you're worried about swap, get a bigger drive, first of all, because
it will be faster and it will be more resilient.
Yeah. And, if it really, really concerns you, go for 32 gigs, if that's what you want.
Yeah,
but just don't do it with your eyes open. Don't expect to see a massive performance jump because there won't be one.
No.
So let's move on to M1 Max. Getting through it, Pete.
Yeah, this comes with 32 gigs of RAM as standard, but it can be spec'd up. If you're a complete muppet and the opposite of an expert, you might decide to go for 64 gig of RAM.
And just for the benefit of those listeners and viewers out there who think Pete might have just called them a muppet, he was calling himself a muppet.
Yes, because I went for 64 gigs of RAM for no reason whatsoever other than it's 32 more than 32.
And that's a perfectly adequate reason when you're spending your own money. Now, there's no CPU performance
Thanks a lot. My wife's just gone, what? I thought that was a down payment on the mortgage.
When I say your money, I mean our money. But yeah, I was just speaking in the third person.
Yes.
There's no CPU performance benefit from M1 Max over M1 Pro. Now, it does have the additional memory bandwidth, but when we've been doing the testing, have we seen a massive difference in CPU?
We've seen a difference, but it has been...
Yeah, it is tiny, really tiny. So you're not going to go from M1 Pro to M1 Max because you need CPU performance. You don't need to. The M1 Pro is already the same CPU.
Yeah.
So this is all about graphics.
The JPU, as I like to call it.
The JPU. And we've got two JPU options.
Yeah. People go, what's a JPU? Where's that come from? GPU. 24 core or 32 core.
Yeah. And both of those are absolutely excellent. Now, For serious GPU workloads like heavy video editing, they are very well suited and perform very well. But I'm not going to say more than that because I don't want to give away.
Well, we've got a whole video coming up on that.
That's it.
Stay tuned, folks.
Absolutely. What you've got to ask yourself, though, is can you see the benefit going from 24 cores to 32? Now, when you go from the 16 core of the M1 Pro up to the 24 core of the Max, that's quite a significant jump. And you do see that. But there's something else as well, of course, that the Max has more of, and that is media engines.
Yes.
So you get... now, I think I could be completely wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that there are two encoders/decoders for codecs like H.264, H.265, that kind of thing, and there are two for ProRes. Whereas
are you asking me or just hypothetically?
If you know the answer,
I don't know the answer.
I'm pretty sure that is the case. So there's one for each of those codecs.
Why don't we ask Erin to research that?
She's not here for some strange reason, Pete.
Oh.
Okay. Then, the M1 Pro only has one each of those media engines. So if you're doing video editing work, you do see quite a big performance jump going from Pro to Max on the basis of those optimizations and the GPU.
Yes, and the Max also has more memory bandwidth, doesn't it? Does that make a difference?
Definitely, to the GPU, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to make a huge difference to the CPU, but it does make a difference to the GPU.
So the jump from the 16-core GPU on the Pro to the 24-core core is, that's 8 cores, but it's a significant one. So does it compute that another 8 cores going from 24 to 32, does that makes the same difference again?
No, not from what I'm seeing. No, unless you're doing gaming. So gaming typically uses the full compute performance of the GPU. So you definitely will see the difference from 24 to 32 in that. But when we're talking about real world applications, like for instance video editing, you're not getting that additional media engine advantage because it has the same number with the two M1 Max chips.
Want to be careful. We're not doing spoilers.
Well, I think we're really only stating the obvious here. Yeah. So you're not getting in the real world, you're not getting that optimization jump with the media engines that you get going from Pro to Max. So all you're getting is those 8 additional cores. So you need to be doing work that is able to push those 8 additional cores. And they don't scale up in a linear fashion anyway.
No.
So, no, there's not as much of a jump between 24 and 32.
Interesting. A little insight there for later.
So I would say if you're interested in gaming, and I think it is an edge case, but it's also not an edge case because a lot of people have one machine for doing both things.
Yeah.
I think if gaming is your priority, you're not going to go out and buy an Apple Mac.
No, but I fall into that latter group where I do have a Windows desktop machine and it is fairly performant, but my kids use that. So I don't really get to go on it very often. And often I think I wish I could just play a game. And I do have some games that run on Mac, but they are quite resource intensive. I haven't tried them yet on the Macs, but I'm a good example of someone who my primary purpose for having a Mac is all the things we've talked about, but being able to play some decent games on it. There's not many AAA titles for them that run on the Mac, and less that I would actually play. But
yeah, so it's a tricky one. But if you are playing games and you can find a game that runs on your Mac, then yeah, you'll certainly see the benefit of 32 cores.
Of course, if gaming's your priority, that's your first thing, then there are much better PC options
for sure.
There at the same price point. So just bear that in mind.
Which brings us then to the question, 32 gigs or 64 gigs? Can we answer that?
We can.
Go on.
You don't really need more than 32 gigs unless you've got a specific need. And much like we said before, you probably will know if you need it. Like I really needed it.
No, I'm going to come back to that in a minute. The vast majority of tasks run just as well on 32 gigs. So I would say let's summarise what we've discussed. So let's go back to M1. So what we're saying there is anything other than general purpose computing, go for 16 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What about M1 Pro?
Stick with 16 gig. Probably the sweet spots are the entry-level models.
Yeah.
So the 14-inch 8-core with the 14-core GPU, or the 16-inch 10-core with the 16-core GPU.
Let's see. Those are sweet spots. As regards the other two options that are available on the 14-inch, so you've got a 10-core CPU with a 14-core GPU. That's the first upgrade option for $200 or pounds. Is that worth doing? Well, it depends whether you need that additional performance. I would say,
You probably will know if you do.
yeah, you're already 25% up on standard M1, remember. Going from the 14-core GPU up to 16-core is very negligible difference, and that costs you another $100 pounds. So up to you to decide whether you feel those are worth looking at. So we just think the sweet spots are those entry-level price points. So here in the UK, that entry-level model is £1,900, and I think based on what else is on the market, it's pretty difficult to beat at that price point.
Yeah, I would say so.
And it also, because it has less going on, you get the long battery life as well. Worth saying the M1 Max models have much less battery life than the M1 Pro models.
Yeah, which is another thing to bear in mind. Your use case, where are you using it? Are you going to be out for long periods of time? That kind of thing.
And what about M1 Max? Can we...
Well, you've got to stick with 32 gigs, really. Yeah.
I think most people don't need to go higher than that. And probably the sweet spot here is the...
24 core.
For most people, for the... Yeah.
GPU.
Yeah.
GPU.
Again, we don't want to give away video testing tomorrow, but if you're debating whether or not you want a 24 core or 32 core and you're into video editing, then you'll want to watch that video. And some people might be wondering about SSD size, because the entry level, for example, the entry level 14-inch model in fact, both of the entry level models come with 512, don't they?
They do.
The 1 terabyte is a speed improvement, as well as a capacity improvement, as well as a lifespan improvement.
Yeah.
So I personally think I could quite happily use a laptop with 512 gig of storage.
Yeah. And I always think with storage you should buy more than you need, particularly, again, it's soldered. You can't upgrade it. And although there was a shift for a period of time for smaller physical drives and store everything in the cloud, but of course with some of these big files, like some of the files we were testing with, that's just not practical. You need to have the physical storage. So we're moving to a place where big files, these machines excel dealing with big files, so you need them locally, unless you've got a ridiculous internet connection, which most of us don't.
Yeah, and if you are working with large files like that, consider the workflow that we use, which I think is quite good. I mean, I don't store anything of importance on my actual machine. I use the internal driver's working space and app storage space. If I've got anything serious, everything that I do for work is all backed up in cloud. And those big files, I use external storage drives for those. So I'm not wearing the internal drive unnecessarily, and I'm not filling it up with stuff. So for me, I probably would never buy one of these with more than a terabyte, because I've got a collection of external drives that I'm happy to use, and they are much cheaper than paying Apple's upgrade prices.
It's got a bandolier of them. You just go round like that, like Chewbacca off of that program you like.
Yeah, but your workflow will be different to ours, and this is a really key point. It's all about your workflow. What is it that you need the machine to do? All we can do is provide some insights, and what you should be able to do from that is kind of pick and choose from those insights to figure out what applies to your particular situation. And the final point to make, and we've said this a lot of times, and we'll say it again, it's your money. You spend it how you like. If you want the biggest numbers, and some people do, they just want to have that Halo machine. No, but I've done the same thing, Pete, with my workstation at home. It's over-spec'd for what I need, but it's what I wanted. It was my reward for 25 years of hard work in the computer industry, and everybody's got their reasonings, so you buy whatever you want. This buying advice is just about what you need, and then you can decide, how much above that you want to go.
Good advice.
I thought so.
This man knows what he's talking about. He's almost an expert.
Almost. Pete, it's come to that time in the show when with some nervousness, I look to you for the.
What's the situation with copyrighted music on YouTube? Can you parody it and change the lyrics and get away with it, or do they strike you anyway?
Does this involve you singing?
Well, I'm pretty sure if I sing it, none of the notes will match. So, no, just for future reference. I haven't actually got a jingle today, so perhaps you'd like to do one. Maybe sing us in a little jingle.
I don't want to do that.
No? Okay. Shall I just... I'll power up GarageBand and hit a few notes just so that Tom's got something to edit this to. You ready?
This is well worth the wait, obviously, for everybody.
It's the Rumour Mill.
Of course it is. Really demonstrating your musical prowess there. I don't even know how you manage that, because I'm pretty sure all of those are part of a single key.
That is the skill that I have. Who was it that used to play the piano badly?
Les Dawson.
Yes. You have to know what you're doing to play things badly.
So on our Rumour Mill today, there's a lot of rumours going around about who Erin is, Pete.
Yes, particularly after your last video. If you haven't caught that on the main channel, that's youtube.com/constant geekery. You do a question and answer session with Erin, don't you?
I do. And there are some amusing comments about who Erin might be and who she might be related to. At least one person is absolutely convinced that all the genetic evidence points to the fact that she is, in fact, my daughter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if Erin hasn't seen that...
That's why she's not here this week.
Yeah.
She's crying.
Or could it be another reason, Pete? I mean, who is Erin? Does anybody really know?
Well, there's lots of rumours going around. Like I said, some considered to be a failed attempt at genetic cloning. Not our genetics, though, clearly.
Clearly.
Others have postulated, is she some kind of android or construct, which is getting closer to what it might actually be.
Do we reveal it, Pete? Do we reveal the truth?
I think we should.
Okay, so here you go, everybody. Erin.
You're not going to like this.
Erin is Pete, but we just deep fake the female form on top of Pete and
Some
change
random
the voice.
female form.
Yeah, that's what Erin is. So Erin is just Pete.
Sorry, guys.
And
Anyway.
usually we do a traffic light system for our rumours, don't we?
Why don't
But
we let the
we'll
subscribers do it in the comments?
In the
We're on
comments,
same
so-
page. We didn't even plan it.
So you can give us a green, amber, or red on that one. And let's move on to something more tech-related.
Yeah, so Hyper have released or are releasing something called the Hyper Drive, which is a triple 4K display dock for the MacBook Pro going back to 2016. So it will support from 2016 to 2021. Okay, it's got 15 ports.
Right.
Okay, so
I think I see where this is going. But go on.
three display ports, 3 HDMI ports, gigabit Ethernet, a USB-C, two USB-Cs with 10 gigabits, 3 USB-As with 10 gigabits, an SD card and a micro SD card. It will fit anything from the 13 to the 16 inch, and there's a variety of different models, ranging from $249 to $299. Now, the rumor is that this was funded on Indiegogo during November. After all the research and development's done, this exists as a product, but it was funded successfully, 256% on Indiegogo in November, and they're going to start shipping in December. So I guess there's two rumours there. One, is this an actual product? And two, will it ship in December?
Well, nothing ships when it says it's going to ship on Indiegogo, so I'm going to say red to December. You've put some pictures in our notes here. And maybe we can share those with Tom, and he can just pop that in during the edit. How does it connect to your MacBook? Just out of curiosity, I think.
So it's got, if you imagine the dock sits on the back here, and then on that side there you've got two USBs plugging in, sort of like like a rubberized ribbon cable plugs into the
So it's
USB
using two
Cs.
ports.
Yeah.
Okay, because my first thought was you see a lot of these docks, don't you, with a single Thunderbolt connection.
Yeah, no, this is using two.
So it's got two. So you basically got two 40 gigabit Thunderbolt connections to run three USB-A 10 gigabits, two USB-C 10 gigabits. Yeah, I'm just doing the mental math here. I think it should work. That would work with two of them. Yeah. So, okay.
It's a real product.
Is it?
Yeah.
I don't know, because you wind me up so much with these, Pete, and you
That's
come
a
up with
lot of
such
effort.
nonsense.
That is a lot of effort for me to wind you up with.
So what's the rumour with this? Just that you don't think it's going to be delivered in December?
Well, I said there was two, wasn't there? Will it be December?
Yeah.
And does it exist?
Does it exist? But the fact that you're saying does it exist when you've just said it's a real product.
Well, yeah, but I could be winding
What are
you
they
up.
selling this for? $149.
Well, it depends which one you go for. Scroll. If you look down the bottom there.
Well, that's two of them for $298.
Yeah, but you can go for the smaller one, $124, which will support the 13 or the 14 inch.
How are they doing that for that price? That's
the Indiegogo price. So if you fund the Indiegogo campaign, which I think is closed now, that's what you would have got it for. So it's $249 or $299, which is still
cheap.
really good value.
That's still less than I paid for my Razer Thunderbolt 4.
And it's aesthetically quite pleasing because it kind of just sits underneath, just gives you a little tip on your MacBook Pro.
Okay. Well, I know nothing about this product. So as a rumour, does the product actually exist? Well, you said it does, so I'll have to say green.
It does exist.
Okay. So I don't feel like this was valuable advice and content for our listeners.
Well, it's all like a get-together at short notice. We have been very busy.
We have. So well, that's really good news then. If you can let's just run through that again. So you've got a dock that can give you three DisplayPort outputs for a 4K 60Hz monitor, three HDMI 4K 60Hz. I mean, obviously your Mac is not going to drive 6 displays. With the Macs, I thought it was 4 displays it could do. 4
TV.
Okay, maybe. Gigabit Ethernet, well, never say no to a bit of Ethernet. Pass-through charging, USB-C power delivery 100 watts. Not entirely sure how that would work with the entry-level MacBook Pro, but nonetheless, there we go. Or does it have a separate power supply?
I don't know.
Yeah. High-speed data transfer, so you've got USB-C 10 gigabits times 2, USB-A 10 gigabits, it's times 1 for that, and then USB-A 5 gigabits times 2. So the specs that are underneath the picture don't match the picture. And then micro SD and normal SD, but they're UHS 1 ports, so that's 104 megabytes a second. That's a lot, though, for even if you're paying the full retail price, so for $250
and we've plugged it on the
$300.
channel without that's not any kind of paid promotion there. I just noticed it and thought it was an interesting product. So if Hyperdrive get loads of interest now, you're welcome.
Very good. Anyway, we should probably leave things there and wind it up because we've also got to do some other filming today.
Yes.
Next week, we don't have a podcast.
No.
That's because Pete here has rudely decided to take a holiday. The week following that is the 30th, so we'll have a podcast as usual. And the week after that is 7th of December, where we shall be doing our live podcast. Or are you away that week?
No, I'm away the following week.
Excellent.
From the 10th.
Okay, so we'll start getting stuff together for the 7th then, for doing the live podcast.
Any suggestions for what you'd like us to cover in the live podcast? We want you there. We want you to be part of it. Maybe we'll get some special guests on. I don't know. But, yeah, throw us some ideas and we'll see what we can run with.
Mm-hmm.
You can either leave them in the comments or if you want them to be more secretive, you can email them.
Yeah, so podcast@constantgeekery.com. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thanks to our new subscribers as well, knocking on the door of 1,200 subs now on the podcast channel and over 29,000 on the main channel now, which is very nice. So,
fantastic.
Thank you, everybody, for your support. We really do appreciate it. We enjoy making the content, and we're glad that you enjoy receiving the content. Is that the correct term?
Yes.
Receive our content. And we'll see you next week.
Cheerio.
Cheerio.
You really enjoy making the content with me? Or was that just for the listeners?
We say what we need to say
Okay.
on the podcast.
All right.
We don't need to reveal all the truths.
No, fair enough.